I would like to invite to the stage two extraordinarily talented giants, one from Paris and one from London. Please, Jacques Attali and Lord Sardfras, please. Thank you, sir. Everybody. So, Jacques and I are old friends, and I don't know how to introduce him. He is an institution in France, an institution in EMEA, the author of how many books, Jacques?
87.
87 books. He's the author of 87 books. I'm so sorry I asked. He served as chief of staff, as I recall, to Francois Mitterrand. He was involved with Horst Teltschik in forming the EU, and he serves as a special advisor to President Macron, and has been a close and dear friend of mine for decades now, and serves as the chairman of the C3AI EMEA Advisory Board. And then I also, so thank you, Jacques, for joining us. And then I also want to welcome my more recent dear friend, Lord Amr Sardfras. Lord Sardfras is a member of the House of Lords in the UK, and he is very much involved in keeping that situation under control, which is about like keeping the United States under control in the same league. So it's pretty interesting. And so, Lord Sardfras, thank you, sir, for joining us.
And the book is yet to be written.
It will be written. So, gentlemen, one of the, I believe that the largest commercial application of artificial intelligence will be in the area of precision health. The applications are not that difficult to understand. I mean, when we think about it, we could aggregate the healthcare records of the population of France, or the population of the UK, or the population of the United States, and the genome sequences and radiology and pharmacology and what have you, behavioral history, into a unified federated image, and then build machine learning models that will predict with very high levels of precision, for example, what disease people are going to be diagnosed with in the next 5 years. And then we could use that information to intervene clinically and avoid the diagnosis. We can combine these, we will combine these systems with these devices. Many of the people in the room, if not all, are censored already. You can think fast forward a few years, we will all have multiple sensors on our bodies where we'll be able to remotely sense, pulse, blood sugar, gut chemistry, brain waves, heart arrhythmia, what have you. And so the, body temperature, blood pressure. And so the opportunity to combine these devices with precision medicine gives us the opportunity to serve previously unserved constituencies. I don't believe for a minute that AI will replace the physician like the old kind of hokey Watson ads. But there's no question that AI does and will inform physicians, as it does today in radiology and other areas, to give more precise diagnoses, genome-specific medical protocols, drug discovery, what have you. If we look at, AI is going to impact all sectors of the economy, and in many sectors of the economy, Health is the biggest industry. It's 18% of the GDP in the United States. It's about a $4 trillion business. We spend about $13,000 per person per year on healthcare. I think in the UK, it's about let's see, I have it actually. I think we're spending about £6,000 per year in healthcare per person through the NHS, and it amounts to about 10%, 9% of the GDP, and in aggregate, I think it's about 300 million pounds a year are being spent. I don't know what the numbers are in France. Jacques, you may know. Jacques, I'd be shocked if you will not have given this topic some thought. What are your thoughts on AI and health and the opportunities and the perils that might be associated with that?
Well, you're not going to be surprised, but one of my 87 books is about health and future of health, written many years ago, and I still think that it's a huge challenge and a huge potential for AI.
Let's see, where's your mic, Jacques? We need to move it up a little bit, I think. A little bit higher.
Okay. Is it okay like that? It's better?
Can we guys, can you turn that up back there a little bit? Thank you.
The amount of money spent on health worldwide is something like $8 trillion. Half of it is in the US.
4 trillion in the US, so it's got to be big, a lot more than 8 trillion in the world.
While at the same moment, as you know, the life expectancy in the US is declining, which means that the amount of spending is not correlated with the efficiency of spending. That's another issue, which is not exactly another issue.
No, I think we spend like more than anybody in the world, but we can't argue that we have the best healthcare in the world. Something tells me that you'll have that argument anyway.
No.
And you're believe me, you tend to be right about these things.
It happens to be a fact, unfortunately, and it's true everywhere. Some countries spend too much, some countries spend too less. But what is important to...
You gonna help us out here? Yeah, thanks. I think, here you go, Jacques. We're gonna switch.
What's important to take note is that whatever kind of efficiency we can get, it will be good if it is used for health and not for something else, because there is huge demand for more health on many, many other issues, which, as you said, is mainly related to the use of man relations direct. AI could be tremendous worldwide on many dimensions. Prevention, self-monitoring, as you said, mainly a dimension of prevention. Diagnosis, therapy, research, and mainly differently in some countries. In the highly industrialized country, it could be through a lot of technologies, but for many countries, it could be through distance and
distance medicine.
Distant medicine. Africa, which is going to be 2 billion people in 30 years, more, and India, which is going to be, which is already today the largest country in the world in terms of population, they can leapfrog from the very poor level of health that they have to a high standard through distant medicine, using AI, and taking the money that they save from that to have more nurses, more hospitals, more people to take care of real issues. It's a huge market, and it is a huge potential for improving the quality of life of people. It's not the only answer, because as I said, many new problems appear from environment, from distress, from psychological issues, from drugs, use of drugs, which are not to be solved by more AI, but by other kind of behavior. But AI is a huge potential for making a more equal health system for the world and to transform radically what is happening. What is very important also to take note that we are at a moment of a huge progress in many therapy on cancer, as we have seen also on some vaccines, as we have seen through COVID. And on many issues, we are on the verge of enormous progress linked to genomic. And my dream is, Tom, to see you finding a way to find a link between AI and genomics.
AI and genomics,
I'm sure there is a huge link to be found here, and that's a development that is to be yet to be done.
Thank you. So, Lord Sarfraz, maybe you can tell us, I know there's an active dialogue going on in the UK about health, okay, and the situation with the national health system and kind of what's going on there, and the intersection, a lot of discussion about modernization of the system. Perhaps you can share with us, very few of us in the room are from Great Britain, kind of what the situation is and what, from the government perspective, your plans are.
Yeah, so the UK has been an exciting place politically for the last year. And Tom, you said, I remember 6 months ago, Tom said there's been crop loss in Northern Africa and Spain, and how are you going to deal with the food shortages? And I said, like any good parliamentarian, Tom, it's under control, there's no issue with food shortages. And now for the last 3 weeks in the UK, if you go to the supermarket, you're only allowed to buy 3 packets of tomatoes. And so I'm really happy to be here, Tom. I've been loading up on tomatoes for the last couple of days. And so delighted to be here. Look, the National Health Service of the UK is a great part of what we offer our citizens, right? And so it's free. Healthcare is free for any resident of the UK. You don't have to just be a citizen, any resident. And this is the largest employer in Europe, 1.2 million people, and the 5th largest employer in the world. And we spend just under 20% of our national budget on the NHS. So you imagine why people get upset when there are 7 million people in the country who are on various waiting lists to see a doctor. You imagine why people get upset while in March alone, this month alone, there are 11 different strikes that doctors and nurses and emergency workers are doing in the UK, including 999, our equivalent of 911, the emergency service. If you call 999, there's a chance that they might say, please leave a message, we'll call you back. That's not what you want. And so there's a demand and supply issue, which is not rocket science, Tom. It's some of your simpler technology of sort of inventory management. So there are beds in the UK, hospital beds, 10% of beds at any time where patients are ready to go home, but we don't know where to send them. And we're actually renting hotel rooms to send them and to give them care in their hotel rooms, and we don't have the people to do that. And so some of the things that Jacques was talking about, the sort of remote monitoring applications, are very much a priority for the government. Look, for politicians in the UK, healthcare and the NHS is always number 1 or number 2 in what voters care about. And so I think this is the time, Tom, there's a lot of discussion happening. There's been lots of experiments, sort of lab experiments, 40 or 50 of them across the NHS, but I think this is the time for an enterprise-type solution.
And how do you feel the people of the UK are going to respond to we have a problem. We have 7 million people waiting for health care, so I think people are a little bit outraged about that. And I think this is sufficiently critical that the current government is concerned that this might affect its ability to hold on. A lot of this discussion of the modernization of the healthcare system in the UK associated with this federated data platform where they're going to aggregate the health records for the population of the UK into a unified federated image. There seem to be a lot of concerns about privacy, and people are concerned that they both don't want to wait in line for health care. At the same time, they don't want anybody to have access to their health care records. Yeah. How do you resolve, tell us about those kind of conflicting emotions and how are they they seem mutually exclusive.
Yeah, so I think you'll adopt the path of least resistance first, right? And so the plumbing of healthcare is not where consumers, citizens in our case, interact with the service. And so I think that's where it will begin. The challenge, Tom, and the risk is this concept over the last month or so introduced by Tony Blair that the UK should have a sovereign AI capability. Now, I'm not sure that's what we should have. We should have the best AI capability, whether we rent it or buy it or whatever. It's good. Whenever you hear sovereign anything, you know that politicians are serious about it. But I think that's the wrong direction to head.
Interesting. So this is something that Tony Blair came up with within the last month?
This is recent. Politicians always need reason to stay relevant.
What's the good side of that? What am I missing here?
The good side is, you'll have lots of sort of domestic entrepreneurship. Talking about politicians trying to stay relevant, just a quick thing. Our former health secretary decided, talking about books, Jack, that it's a good idea to write a book about how he dealt with the pandemic. And so he thought the way to do it is to hire a ghostwriter to do it, because a lot of work writing a book, let alone 86 books, it's a lot of work. So he hired a ghostwriter, and he gave her his phone with all his WhatsApp messages, 100,000 WhatsApp messages. And she said, this is wonderful, and released it to the Daily Telegraph. And so the trust in politicians around healthcare has now plummeted completely. Real polling data that an AI chatbot is more trustworthy to a citizen than a politician.
Well, I'm not sure that doesn't ring true for all of us. So when we get to these, when we get to this idea of precision health at the intersection of AI and healthcare, this will happen, certainly as the sun will rise tomorrow, okay? And we will deliver more efficient, lower cost, more effective healthcare to larger and previously unserved populations who will be healthier. At the same time, okay, these systems will be used, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a single care provider like you have in the UK or whatever kind of system we have in the US. I don't know quite how to describe it. Whether it's the public sector or whether it's the private sector, the idea that either one of them is going to act beneficially, I mean, you can get over that because that's not the way it works, okay? And these systems will be used to ration healthcare, hard stop, okay? And, we will know, for example, this healthcare provider will know who's going to be diagnosed with what terminal illness in the next 5 years. And I'm not talking about early detection, I'm talking about disease prediction. And we can do that. That is within the state of the art. And, how is that information going to be used? And do you want to know that you're going to be diagnosed with a terminal illness in the next few years? I'm not sure I do. The idea that either one of our, that whether, that whoever's in control is going to act beneficially, I mean, you can get over that. I mean, see Facebook for details. And these data, who cares about pre-existing conditions when we know what you're going to be diagnosed with? And the decision will be made that it's simply not in the best interest of the nation to provide Tom Siebel or Jacques Attali health care for whatever reason. This will happen. And so it's going to be pretty tragic when this happens, and it will happen. And we get to these issues of how are they going to regulate around this? We have this my last time, my sense is, Jacques, the people in France can get pretty animated about issues related to length of work week and retirement age and fuel prices. And I suspect they get pretty animated about privacy issues also as it relates to health information. How do you think this is going to play in France?
You're right. All around the world, and Europe and France in particular, we have the same problems. Lack of doctors, lack of nurses, difficulty
You need to speak a little more loudly because
and difficulty to transfer data, which is key. I mean, it's the most important break of any evolution. But before that, there is something that must be done maybe more easily, which is the reduction of cost, of administrative cost, of management of health, which is huge everywhere. And
management of what?
health.
Yes.
The management of health, according to many studies, it has been demonstrated that you can save 20% of health spending only by dealing with administrative cost of health through the administration of hospitals. That doesn't mean that you take that money out of health, but you can put that on real health. But not so complex to be done. And some companies have been developed to develop software for that. It's a huge potential and a huge need. One. Second, I'm sure that the most important difficulty is to get some aggregation of data while keeping confidentiality from the sake of the behavior of each of us. If this can be done through a kind of global architecture of rules. In Europe, we have put that kind of rules in place through a global convention of confidentiality, which has been agreed among all the EU members, only EU members, but it's a global agreement on confidentiality that maybe will work also on health. That is key in order to get the global personal health file of each of us, which is spread on different doctors, different hospitals, wherever we are. We need first to have all that gathered.
But do you think the people of France will tolerate the idea of their healthcare records being generally available through a French healthcare system?
I think, well, when you say to someone, this will help save your life, everything is possible. Mm-hmm. If it's true, if it is Theranos or what kind of crook, of course it doesn't work. But if it is true and if it is fair and if it's for everyone, I think it will work. It has to be demonstrated, but I think it will work. And actually, it begins to exist in many French and other countries in Europe. Hospitals are working together to merge the file that they have of specific individuals in order for that to be available for all the doctors.
And is France a public? I mean, do you provide health care?
Healthcare is free.
Is there something like NHS or is
Yes.
it like the United States? What's the setup?
Healthcare is free for everybody, paid by the government. If you want to have more, you can have private doctors. There is also a private system, which is also paid by the government if it is under control of the government regulations. Mm-hmm. Therefore, everything is free from birth to final illness. You can go all through your life without paying anything. It's the reason why you have high level of taxes, because it's paid through taxes.
Mm-hmm. And Lord Sarfraz, on this privacy issue, how do you think this is going to play out in the people in the UK? How are they going to deal with it?
In all honesty, Tom, I have a theory, which is the further east you go from the UK, the quicker you'll see implementation of AI in healthcare, quicker. And so you go east, you go to Turkey, right? And so some of you might know that Turkey has become the hub for cosmetic procedures in the entire region. Everyone goes to Turkey for any type of cosmetic procedure, anything, nose job, anything that ends with job, any medical procedure that ends with job. You go to Turkey. And there's no coincidence that there's about 60 AI healthcare startups in Turkey. Because you're going to go in for one job and come out with a wearable that will keep tracking you and bring you back for something else. You go further east, the Middle East. The UAE, of course, has a minister for AI. They've had it for a number of years, which is great. A cabinet member for AI, wonderful thing. Saudi Arabia, look, we're just going into Ramadan. Some of you might be familiar with Ramadan, in which Muslims don't eat or drink anything from sunrise to sunset. And it's a great sort of healthcare opportunity in Saudi Arabia because everyone panic eats in Ramadan after you open your fast. Panic eat, then they have to get their stomachs pumped for the first 4 or 5 days. And these Middle Eastern countries pay many hundreds of millions of dollars a year to pay for healthcare of their citizens overseas. I think they'll be very quick to adopt. If you go further east, India. India has publicly said that over the next 10 years, AI will contribute $1 trillion to their economy. This has been an Indian government statement. And there are hundreds of millions of people in India who got a cell phone before they had a real phone, before they had clean drinking water. And so the access to healthcare issue in India, there's no preventative healthcare at all. 35% of the population of Indian children have stunted growth, lack of nutrition. So I think they'll be quicker. And then you end up in countries like Singapore, where the government is in fact more ambitious than the private sector on using AI in healthcare.
Well, I think that obviously I'm very excited about AI, and when we apply AI to basically physical systems, I think there are no bias in these data. We're dealing with pressure, temperature, rotational velocity, torque, right? When we're issues, or quantity and volumes and velocity. And this is where we get into supply chain, demand chain, predictive maintenance, and the 90%, 95% of what we do in AI are related to these physical systems where there are no bias. Now, any of these systems where we have the intersection of AI and sociology, it gets pretty scary, and because there are bias in these data, and there's blind bias in historical medical data based on who got care and who didn't get care. Okay, when we talk about HR systems, very frequently people want to talk to me about using bias for HR systems. Some of our largest customers have talked to me about that. That's very scary stuff. I can remember once, being in the office with the Undersecretary of the Army, and he was in the United States, and he was a huge fan of C3, and we had been doing a lot of work for him and for the Secretary. And he said, "Tom, well, I want to build a HR system for the Department of the Army." And I said, "Okay, Mr. Secretary, what does that mean?" He says, "Well, we writ large, the Department of the Army in the United States, by the time we work in the reserves and everybody else, it's about 1.5 million people. And he said, we're going to use this to decide, who to promote, who to assign." And I said, "Sir, I think this is a really bad idea. And because we have this thing called cultural bias in these data, and we can break our backs and build this system and have it live in production, okay, in say 6 months, 6 months, maybe a year, okay, because that's a pretty big system in a pretty complex mess of data." But I said, the problem is, no matter what the question is, the answer is going to, due to cultural bias in the data, no matter what the question is, the answer is going to be white, male, went to West Point. Okay, and in the 21st century, that answer's not going to fly. So then we got to read about ourselves on the front page of the New York Times. Then we got to go testify before Congress, and I'm not going with you. So, we decided to part ways on that one. I think precision health, as both of you know, is an area of very, very substantial interest personally, because I think that the social and economic benefits that from applying AI to health will be simply staggering. But we do have these these bias problems, and this issue of I'm not a guy that uses the word equity a lot, okay, because I don't really do that, okay. But this health equity issue is real, okay, and the privacy issues are real, and the ethical issues are real, and what we will legislate in the U.S. by people who have no idea what they're doing, we will regulate in the EU by people, with all due respect, gentlemen, who have absolutely no idea what they're doing, okay? and who don't know a computer from a toaster and don't have any idea what they're talking about. So, I think we're going to get into these situations where we're facing these enormous ethical dilemma going forward. I think a lot of people would like to punt to government to regulate for us. You haven't seen many examples where that seems to work, but so this is very scary stuff. I'm not sure how this resolves itself, but I know that before this is over, the ethical issues associated with what we do in AI are going to be, they're very scary, they're very disturbing. There needs to be more dialogue about it. There needs to be more conversation about it. I mean, what goes on with social media now, in the use of AI and using, these devices to manipulate about 4 billion people at the level of the limbic brain. It's truly criminal. And so, a lot of this goes to some very scary places, and I'm not sure how it resolves itself. I'd like to believe government's the answer, but Jacques, I don't think government's the answer for anything.
I know.
We're kind of on the other side of that one. You please go ahead, sir.
No, you're right, and it's very profound, and it's a challenge for the next decades. Just some small comments. Whatever we do, China will do it.
Whatever
we do or don't, China will do it. That means that China will do it. Therefore, either we let China set the standards for the world, or we think about it and not be blind, consider that what you say is true. It can be a terrible danger against democracy and a terrible danger of mismanagement. But I think people like you, which are one of the most important experts and visionary of this field, should not be shy in interfering into finding a way with lawyers and people of goodwill to find and establish what Asimov was thinking about, which is a charter of AI, of ethical AI worldwide. We need a worldwide ethical charter of AI. And we cannot avoid to think about it and to establish it before China imposes its own, which will be a nightmare.
Lord Sauerfrost, you have a final thought on this?
I can assure you lawmakers in the UK can distinguish between a toaster and a computer.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your friendship. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you, sir.